Hi, my name is Travis Springfield, and I am the Assistant Director of Fine Arts for Fort Bend ISD. During the Texas Educational Theater Association virtual conference this year, myself, Dr. Scott Allen from the High School for Performing and Visual Arts in Houston ISD, and Jeannie DeLeon from Connolly Middle School in San Antonio presented a workshop on the ethics of inspiration. That workshop was recorded, and we wanted to share that through the UIL student conferences this year for folks to be able to learn more about the concerns around copyright and plagiarism in our productions across the state. So hopefully you can enjoy this workshop recording and learn a little bit more about things to consider as you work on productions, both for competition and for your regular season. Thank you. So while we're getting everybody situated so that we're able to be more of in a discussion mode when we get to the latter part of our session, I want you to take a look at the quote on the screen that from Pablo Picasso about bad artists copy and good artists steal. Well, it's just an opportunity for you to think about that quote and what it means to you. You know, the reason for this session is really that as we begin to have access to more and more resources online, and we as directors and judges are beginning to see work that's on stage that isn't always original. This brings into question, at what point are we crossing a line as creators of art between imitating and copying and actually taking inspiration from something that we've seen. So that's kind of the focus of our session tonight, is really kind of discuss that and explore kind of what that means to everyone. So, you know, that idea of bad artists copy and good artists steal, you know, what's the difference between copying and stealing? And that's part of what we're really going to discuss. Why? There we go. You know, because it's always part of the process as an artist in a creative is to be inspired by the things that you encounter in your world, things that you see, by other people's work. We all start somewhere, and we start with an idea usually that's not original. We've seen something that excited us, and we wanted to do that show because we saw a version of it somewhere or whatever. But if we're always inspired by other people, where do we draw a line between inspiration and copying? And to name the ugly side of it, plagiarism and copyright infringement. And that's really where we're getting at this point, when you can watch an entire production online and pause that production and take notes or you know, work with students as you're watching a video, things like that. And so those are the kinds of questions that we want to kind of explore today. So this is from Petra Raspel-Borinsky's article called Creative Inspiration versus Imitation, When Does Copying Turn into Plagiarism? And really, this is where we're kind of going to explore today. At what point do we cross that line, you know? So there's a moral and legal question involved in imitation of art. So if you see something and you copy it verbatim and you don't tell people that you took it from somewhere and you pass it off as your own, well, that's plagiarism. When you don't say where you took something from. And that's a moral issue, right? If you take something that doesn't belong to you without permission, and if you guys would mute if you're not talking or we're not discussing, just so that we don't have things pop up, that'd be great. So if you take something without permission and it belongs to someone else, then you've stolen their work and they're owed some compensation, which you're not giving them. And that's a legal issue. And where those two things cross together, that's where you're really kind of looking at some ethical dilemmas. When you both take work that's not yours and say it's yours, and then take work without permission, you're in that really kind of scary purple area. And we don't want to be there, you know. That's not where we want to be as artists or as educators who are modeling proper behavior to students, right? And so I think that's something that's really important for us to kind of think about. But does that mean you can't copy or you can't get inspiration? Of course not. You know, this is from a book called Still Like an Artist, and it's this great little book here. It's really easy read. It's actually from a Texas artist named Austin Kleon. And this little chart's a great way to kind of look at things, you know, because the idea of Pablo Picasso's quote is that it's okay to steal, but stealing, like I think Amy Wernick put in her comment, implies action. You know, when you're stealing something, you're taking it and you're going to do something with it, right? Simply copying is basically like photocopying, and it looks exactly the same. There's no originality. So this chart's really a great place to kind of explore that idea of what's the difference between good theft and bad theft. And so this column on the sides are, you know, thinking about the fact that when you take something, you borrow something, that you're honoring that work in some way. And honoring partially is the fact that you aren't trying to hide where it came from, that you're raising it to a higher level. You know, you degrade it when you don't give it credit, when you don't give it its place, or when you don't try to make it better, right? The idea of the fact that when you're stealing something, good theft involves studying, not just saying, oh, that was really cool, let me grab it and use it. It's understanding the why behind it. There's a great quote in Austin's book about the fact that you shouldn't just steal to copy an artist. You want to be able to see like an artist, right? And so that idea of studying the reasons behind the brushstrokes or the lighting design, where did they get that idea and how do they implement it, and understanding the concepts rather than just grabbing what's a quick fix or a quick Band-Aid.
So Travis, do you want us just to talk to you, or do you want us to do typing chat?
Rosemary, right now we're not really doing this. We'll do discussion at the end. We're going to go through a little bit of the presentation, and we're going to talk at the end. Right now, we're just kind of going through things. If you have questions, you can put questions in the chat, and then Scott's going to kind of monitor that, and we're going to come back to it at the end. If there's something that's really kind of pressing that we really need to stop and discuss, then Scott's going to let us know. But please put comments in the chat. And then the reason we want it to be a discussion-based session is so at the end, because this is only gonna be about 20 minutes of this background, but we really want to get to the issues that you guys have seen that we're concerned about, and really talk about the things that how we can make a difference in moving people in the right direction. So, but for now, if you'll just put comments in the chat, that'd be great. Jeannie or Scott, did you have any comments about any of those first couple of bullets on the chart?
Nope, you're doing great.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. So, you know, one of the other things that makes good theft different than bad theft is the fact that you don't steal from one thing and copy one thing verbatim. You know, you're taking bits and pieces from lots of things, and by combining those in a new mosaic in a new way, you're creating an original. But there may be lots of pieces that came from other things. I think that a lot of our work as directors is made up of all these little stolen moments, our stolen ideas from other things we've seen. And in that compilation of those stolen moments, we've created that original work. And that's what good theft is really about, is finding that new thing from all of those gathered pieces. When you're just taking basically one thing that you've seen and you're copying it from point A to point B, that's bad theft. Well, in many ways, because it's definitely not original. And you're not growing as an artist, your students aren't growing as artists. And so it's important to think about it from that perspective too. This next one about credit and plagiarism is something that I think we as educators all understand. If you are taking something that you did not create and saying it's your work, that's not okay. I mean, it's pretty black and white, right? And so if you copy the blocking of someone else's show and then claim that as your directorial concept or vision, that's plagiarism. And that's not something that we would encourage as educators. And a matter of fact, in most places, if a student turned in a paper that was plagiarized, not only would they get a 0 on that paper, they'd probably have some disciplinary consequences. Right, Dr. Allen, principal of HSPDA. So I think that's a pretty clear one. The next one about transforming and imitating, that's also part of like stealing from many and stealing from one. That idea of taking something and creating something new. When you imitate, you're not creating something new, you're simply regurgitating something. Transformation happens when you begin to add your own voice, your own piece of the puzzle. You mix things in that you learned from someplace else. You know, that's when things becomes something different. You know, a play's really like Frankenstein. It's a bunch of bits and pieces sewn together, and then life comes out of that, you know? And so I think it's about that transformation. And remix and rip off are pretty much the same idea. You know, if you're just basically taking that little, what was that silly putty thing when you put it against the comic back in when we were kids, and no one else knows that if you're not old enough. But that idea, you peel it off and you've got the same little imprint. You know, if we're just peeling off somebody else's imprint, we're not creating something original. We're not learning, you know. But if you take that and really something that you like and remix it and redevelop it, then that's good theft, because it becomes something new. And I think that's the overall theme, is that just it's okay to take something, to be inspired by something, but you've got to find a way that you reworked it and put it into your own voice. Anything else to add on this slide, guys?
That's good.
Okay. All righty. So let's talk about what that means kind of in our theatrical world, right? So much of what we do truly is intellectual property. And I think we're really clear on script and music and lyrics because it's so ingrained in our UIL one-act play process. You have to pay rights for your scripts. It's part of the paperwork you turn in. You have to, your principal has to sign off that all copyright has been met for any music in your show. But what we forget about is that choreography, costume, scenic design, sound design, lighting design, publicity and marketing, and blocking and direction are also intellectual property. There have been law suits happening against individuals in all of these areas where people have taken work of someone else and recreated that in another venue and didn't give credit or didn't pay for that work. And as a result of that, there have been lawsuits. So it's not as common as the script and music one, but I can guarantee you that if you take some Disney show and you recreate the costumes and the set and the publicity and poster design especially, little Mr. Mickey Mouse will be knocking on your door real quick to say, hey, where's my piece of that pie, right? And it's just that Disney has such a wide arm that they're in a broad reach to be able to kind of manage their licensing that you see more of that. It's the independent directors or the smaller companies where really great work is happening. And now because of the internet, you can see and view that you're able to lift some really great intellectual property work and maybe get away with it. That doesn't make it right. And so I think that's really a part of what we have to think about, that all of these items are really protected. Anything else to add, guys?
Rosemary had a really great comment in the chat. She said that transform is the word that she understands most clearly because it involves creation, and people are agreeing with that. So I thought it was a great point.
Right, and I mean creativity has the word create in it, right? And so it's all about the fact that you're envisioning something and you're bringing it to life, and most likely that hasn't been seen before in the way that you envisioned it, right? And so that's really, really that's a great point, Rosemary. So I mean, these are areas that we really think we need to hone in on as we kind of discuss what's happening out there in our programs. And I saw several arts administrators on here. I see judges, and there's some high school directors, I think, a few. I know we're up against the UIL Open Forum right now, so I know that there's a lot of important information that a lot of directors need to know about one-act play and such. So I don't think we have as many directors as we might have hoped. But does that mean that there's nothing available for you to steal from? And that's not true. There's lots of stuff that isn't intellectual property. You know, style isn't copyrighted. You know, Tim Burton's style is not copyrighted. You can get a sense of a particular type of play, like Disney itself. The idea of the kind of colors and good and evil archetypes and things like that are not copyrighted. Mood isn't copyrighted, and color palette. There's a great article out there somewhere, like 50 color palettes from film that you can get as a starting point for creating a mood of a show. Those aren't copyrighted. A theatrical device you've seen applied in a show is not copyrighted. So if you saw a really cool moment where, like I loved the use of the plexiglass kind of like screens in Medea last year at State. That's a great idea about being able to backlight and be able to see through it. It's almost like a different version of a scrim. That's a cool theatrical device. You can reuse that as much as you want in some way in a different show. Because it's a device that's been introduced somewhere, those kinds of things are perfect to steal. And general concepts, that idea of setting something in an apocalypse or setting something, in 1950s, You know, those are up for grabs. You know, if you saw a really cool version of Midsummer's as a steampunk, you know, that doesn't mean you can't do a steampunk version of Midsummer's as well. You know, those are all things that are open for interpretation. But yours wouldn't look just like the other steampunk that you saw. Other things to share in this section, guys?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Moves beautifully.
All right. So I want to get through all this stuff so that we can get
Really
to some
talk about it.
discussions.
Yeah.
And so, so really, you know, there's some guiding questions that you as a director might want to look at. And so these are the questions that we're looking at. And Jeannie and I were going to kind of walk through these in two different kind of scenarios, looking from a what was the scenario, your scenario going to be?
From maybe a new director or a director that's just coming in. Maybe they haven't had a great deal of experience, or they're navigating through, you know, all of the other things that you're dealing with when you're doing a show besides doing the show part, with
Right.
the, you know, eligibility and buses and interpersonal dramas and all of those other things that we work our way through in those early years and we're navigating through.
Why don't you go ahead and go for that with this one?
Absolutely. The guiding questions that Travis has included here, I think, are beautiful. The idea of whether or not you're imitating or if you're recreating. And I think there's a line that we've kind of discussed here as well, and that Travis has set up beautifully. The idea that maybe you've seen a fantastic show and it's like, you know how it goes because it's like you heard the song one time and you know how the song goes. I saw this show and I know how the show goes, you know, that sort of thing. And so the idea that because you know how it goes, you're going to take the different set of kids and put it up. The idea between imitation and recreation is a line that you really want to get into. And as Travis said, you want to pull from as many different pieces to mash those things together. And it's going to be better for, I think, everyone involved. Is material intellectual property. And as he's lined out on these earlier slides, I think that sometimes, particularly in contest pieces, that the idea of intellectual property kind of gets lost in the big mush and the push of it. And so if it is the easiest and the simplest solution would be to, again, offer credit where credit is due with whatever you're picking up, which leads to the next question. Do you have permission? If you have permission to, if you have permission, if you've purchased the rights to it, then you're licensed to do it. So you've covered yourself. How much of the production is original? Travis, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah. So part of it, I think we were talking about was that, you know, that idea of kind of balance between maybe moments that are not completely original, especially with a new director. I mean, thinking about how you approach a particular scene, maybe you saw that scene blocked in a film, you know, and you use some of that. I kind of compare it to the idea of the turnitin.com site that's used by English teachers to check work for plagiarism. And that idea of if a certain percentage of your production is not original and comes back, you know, if 80%, 90%, if something like that, then the show really isn't original. But if, you know, 10% came back as maybe being very similar to something that was out there, you know, that's pretty permissible. That's pretty normal for a paper. So what that percentage would be for theatrical work, who knows? But that idea, if you can honestly look at the production and say, most of what I did up there is something that I've created, you know, then I think you can sit pretty comfortably with yourself. It's a matter of if you honestly look at the work that's up there and know that the majority of it is something that isn't yours, well, then that goes back to the question of, have you given credit to who did create that? Mm-hmm. And we're not just talking about, you know, you want to play as one thing. Everything that you do as a director, everything that you do on your stage, in your space, is a reflection of who you are ethically, professionally. And so it's not okay to copy someone else's work for a fall production either, and not give credit, right? Mm-hmm. And not have permission. If you have a friend who directed a show before and they give you a video and say, yep, you can copy my blocking completely, well, then you should say, based on the staging of Jerry Worsham. You know, he can't give you permission, but, you know, you should be able to do that.
And I also like what you said earlier, and it's come up a couple of different places, the idea that a copy is like a Xerox, and the more often that it comes up, the weaker it gets. You know, that idea of that copying. I think it was Ms. Sherrill said that earlier in the chat. I like that. And I also like the idea of the mosaic that you were talking about earlier. When you're talking about repurposing or creating something new, I mean, we've all been costume coordinators that are putting things together with an idea in mind, but we're pulling from a lot of different sources. So not everything has to be built from scratch. That's not the point.
Exactly. And that idea of just really finding a way to recreate that new, transform that whole process is, and I think that's a guiding question again about, you know, just making sure you're repurposing in a different way or in a different show. I think that's also a really good way to make sure that you're not crossing these lines, is when you see something in an Antigone and you really loved it, you know, that's a cool moment, and you're able to repurpose that in, you know, some other drama, you know, in some way, then you're definitely not copying, but you're getting inspiration from something. So, and that's all about getting to that point where we create something new. I mean, that's really where we are. So, I mean, if you can answer these questions as you're working on a show and honestly with yourself and feel comfortable after you've looked at these, then I think we're not in that scary purple area, you know, where we're not being ethical or moral, and we're not doing something illegal, you know. And I think this is our responsibility as educators to really teach this to our students. Let's see. Was there anything else on this one? Okay. So this is something, you want to take this one, Jeannie?
Sure. This is Peter Nilsson's Taxonomy of Creative Design. It's on his Sense and Sensation website. I use this with my students too all the time. All artists, I think this is kind of the natural progression of artists, and that's why I use them in my classes, because artists begin with that imitation, and oftentimes with the kids, they'll be apologetic for imitating, or they'll be completely unapologetic because they're imitating, you know, whatever it is. But that's the first step and the baby step. And I saw it come up in the chat earlier. The transformation is what makes it feel creative. It's like, as you grow through, you start with the imitation. I know how this goes, right? That's kind of that first step when you're learning to get feet up under you. And then you start with the variation. You start putting things together and shifting it just a bit, you know, here or there. When you start combining things, which is what we were talking about earlier, you'll take a style in one place and then a show maybe from another time period or whatnot. You start combining some different ideas together. Which leads you to transformation. And then those magical moments where we have things that have just never been seen or never been done before in that way. And that's always the goal as we're moving through this. And you can see as novelty in form, novelty in content, that sort of thing. And as we grow, we're growing out. So it's a kind of a good idea. We had the guiding questions on the previous slide. This is, I don't know, for the chart people amongst us, I like this one because it's a place where you can say, okay, you are here. You know what I mean? Whenever when you're working on a piece, it's like, okay, we are right here. This is where we are, and this is where we were with, or where I was with this show, and where I would like to be with this show, that sort of thing. So it's a neat resource.
Well, and I think, you know, Jeannie and Travis and I talked earlier in the week, and when you've got that new director who maybe is an English teacher who has no experience with theater or directing, but they've been given the task of directing one-act play, you know, imitation is what they rely on. So I think that just knowing where you are in the journey and basing it on this chart, I think that, you know, a newbie who has no experience versus the 10-year director, the skills they bring to a production and directing are completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's got to be some honesty. Again, a lot of this is about self-reflection and where you are on this chart. If you're a 10-year director and you're still hanging out in the gray space in imitation, are you really doing yourself justice, right? And you know, and really looking at trying to expand your abilities as an artist as well. But I love this chart, and Jeannie shared this with us, and I thought it was a really great addition. So, we're in Texas, and if you're in Texas, things all end up being about competition in some way, right? And so UIL is something that where this is of particular concern, because you have a competitive element added to what should be really based on artistic professionalism anyways. The idea of copyright and plagiarism begins to carry even more weight because, contests are connected to it. And so we want to take some slides to talk about UIL considerations. I had some long conversations with Paula about this particular topic and kind of where UIL stands with things. And so I'll discuss that a little bit, but in general, the One Act Play Ethics Code itself should give you some common sense perspective on how you should approach the idea of copyright and plagiarism. Is that the mission of One Act Play contest is to promote a spirit of cooperation among all involved, directors, students, administrators, parents, and audience members, to promote growth in the realm of educational theater. The One Act Play contest ethics code shall carry the force of rule. Member school districts, member schools, and our covered school district personnel who violate any of the provisions of this code shall be subject to penalty. And so when you get into the ethics code itself, there are several things that really make sense as far as copyright and plagiarism being violations of ethics. In our opinions as panelists and really talking about this topic, copyright infringement could be considered an ethics violation and could be subject to review by the district executive committee or the state executive committee, depending on the level of competition, as is the case with any ethics violation. So UIL can't give opinions on copyright. They're not the copyright police. They can't manage and try to screen everything and determine whether something is a violation of copyright. However, with more and more resources available out there and more videotapes of professional productions, this question of ethics will become an issue as people see shows at all levels of competition that are direct copies of professional work. And as those things come to light, the place where it's going to be resolved is in the ethics area. And so I think it's important for people to understand that if back at those guiding questions, if you're in competition and you can't honestly answer, is this work original? Should it be used for competition? And I think that's something that everybody has to really consider. And right now, people think of copyright as just applying to scripts and music, partially because the copyright compliance form lists scripts and music specifically. But as our understanding of intellectual property expands, and as those resources are more available in the internet, copyright is something that has much broader umbrella that needs to be considered. And we as directors and educators need to be sure that we're embracing that idea. So these sections, particularly in my mind, address the ethics question as well. That idea of directing and sponsor companies and individuals should direct and sponsor companies, meaning your production, and individuals without resorting to tactics which attempt to skirt the rules or distract from sound educational principles. Is copying another person's work and passing it off as your own a sound educational principle? It's not. And so if you're doing that with your students in a competition, then those choices are probably not ethical. Are my choices ethical? Are my practices modeling sound educational principles for my students? Am I being open and transparent about my process? If you can't say openly that this is my work, you're not being ethical. If you've copied 90% of a show that's out there on the internet, and not being honest about it, I would argue that even if you're being honest about it, there's no place in competition because it's not your work. But even if you're being honest, if you're not being honest about it, that's where that purple area is. It's not my work. I stole it. I didn't pay for it. That's copyright infringement. And I didn't tell people it wasn't my work. I'm passing it off as my own. That's plagiarism. And then that's in that purple area that we definitely don't want to be as professional artists. So that's questions to think about in this section of the UIL handbook. Again, these are not hard and fast rules, but they're gray areas that are going to become more I think more of an issue as people begin to see work out there being copied from productions that they see on the internet. And this one is especially, to me, obvious that if you're taking something that you see elsewhere and copying, blocking a high percentage of the blocking from another show, that's not your directing. And aid in directing, and specifically Section 1033 talks about directors shall not accept nor solicit aid in the preparation of the play, or in the coaching of actors, or in designing of props, makeup, costumes, scenery, lighting, etc. Obviously, there's exceptions in clinics and those kinds of things. But if you've directly copied another's direction for the majority of the show, are you violating this rule? Have you met the spirit of this rule? In my mind, you're not. And so I think that that's an ethical question you should take as a director. Again, I don't think we have a lot of directors in here right now, but I think that that's something to think about. Now, again, it doesn't mean you can't seek assistance in clinics or ask parents and volunteers to help sew costumes or build scenic elements. Those are all things that you can do. You can rent costumes still. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that if you, basically, this is about accessing another person's work that's out there and lifting it and entering it in competition. And that's happened. It's happened recently. People know about it. And unfortunately, that gives people the idea, well, is this the way that I win? Is this the way that I do well? And that's not the message we want to communicate as an organization, as professionals, as artistic professionals, as educators. So those are the things that the big takeaways for me for UIL. The bottom line is you shouldn't copy someone else's work without permission. And is the majority of what you see on stage your creation? And as directors and artists, we should be our own Turnitin-ins. If I look at what I created, can I honestly say that the majority of what's up there is something new that came out of my head or my students' heads, a collaborative effort from the people involved in the production, and not a carbon copy of somebody else's work? That's what we're really looking at. Any other comments, guys, on those?
So Travis, there's a question. I don't know if you want to address it now or if you want to wait, but the question was just, as an adjudicator, what steps should be taken if they perceive an ethics violation?
And that's where I think that's where we're at now, is that this is, I want to finish the quote and we're going to get to discussion, because those are the kinds of things, because I think a lot of us in here are adjudicators. And this conversation came up at another adjudicator thing back in the last convention. And so we can talk about that. This quote to me really says it all. You know, that idea that the difference between that good and bad theft, immature poets imitate, mature poets steal, bad poets deface what they take, and good poets make it into something better, or at least something different. The good poet wields his theft into a whole feeling which is unique, utterly different from that from which it was torn. T.S. Eliot. It's a great quote, and I think it sums up that idea of what inspiration is about, and what and how copying and plagiarism are just bad theft, and not what we want to see happening. So that we wanted to do those slides just to give us some background about the discussion. This is in the folder that's available to you. So all the resources, if you want to look at the articles or anything, are all there for you. But we wanted to move to the ability to have some discussion about this topic and how it applies to whatever role you may be in. At this point, because we are, everybody's a panelist, I think you can turn on your video cameras and we'll be able to see everybody. And then we can kind of chat, we wanted to have some time to have some discussion. So you're welcome to turn on your gallery view and turn on cameras, and we can entertain questions.
I have a question, Travis.
Yep.
My name is John Grimmett. I'm the head director at Glenda Dawson High School in Pearland, Texas. And I'm probably one of the few directors in this session, mainly because my background is as a composer and a playwright. And so this is a very important topic to me. And I think that there's a lot of you can call them resources or bootlegs or whatever you want to call them at our fingertips. And especially being in quarantine, we've seen a lot of productions that have been streamed by professional theater companies. And for me personally, as a director and somebody working with students, I appreciate the opportunity to see professional productions, because it allows me to say, this is the standard that I can work with my students against. So then that way I'm cognizant of, not stealing or not reproducing or going a different path if I find myself falling into a pattern of behavior, right? I guess my biggest question is, like, I think that every director wants to do new work and wants to inspire their students to do something differently. But oftentimes, the burdens of being a director can be overwhelming. And so it's sometimes easier, or, to use a crass term, lazy, to copy something. So how do directors in our own community hold each other accountable for not copying or not reproducing things in a way that's still collegial, still courteous, but firm in what we feel is the right thing to do?
I think a lot of what is just having the conversations. I don't think we've really been having these kinds of conversations. And I think the more that we start kind of bringing it out of the shadows, and that idea that just basically lifting an entire show and putting it on stage and saying it's yours is not okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with copying ideas or getting the idea of a theme or style, like we talked about. All those things are all right. But I think it's a matter of being honest. And then if you see a show that is the exact show that you saw on one of your streams of something from the National Theater, and that person did the National Theater version and they didn't credit the National Theater, you could say, hey, that your show was really the National Theater's production of blah, 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 but you didn't credit them. Why was that? I think we have to start calling people out. I think we have to be able to start saying, hey, this is not okay. And that I think the fact that we're having these kinds of conversations will help that. Scott or Jeannie?
Well, John, I appreciate what you're saying. And I think that as artists and directors, we all borrow and take ideas from things that we've seen. I think that the concern and the impetus for this session was more of the fact that on more than one occasion, we've seen a production where later we realize in watching a streamed professional production, it is moment by moment, blocking step by blocking step, exactly what somebody else did. And I think it's just acknowledging that that's theft. And, borrowing and stealing and imitating is one thing, but to have a production from start to finish, which is, exactly the same thing, that's kind of where this conversation started.
And I don't think it's lazy. Go ahead, Jeannie.
I want to tag on to what you're saying there. I think too, because we're talking about it and we're talking about it a lot more, y'all, we're only as good as our reputation, and it doesn't take but a minute, for that. That's currency for us. Right. And so I think it's not only necessary, I think it's an important thing to have the conversations. If you see it, say, yeah, this you may want to go ahead and either give credit or, maybe encourage them to choose differently. You know what I mean? Just to call it, because I think when you shine light on it, then, it will more than likely resolve itself.
Well, I think it's interesting too with COVID and everything that's happened. Suddenly, there's been this access to theater that we haven't had before, and so I think all these companies have made their productions available, and so I think it's likely that we are seeing more things that we didn't have a chance, an opportunity to see when you were having to go see it in person. So I I think it's a very relevant moment to have this conversation.
And I don't think it's lazy necessarily, especially for new directors or people who are packed with, a ton of shows they have to do in their season to really kind of emulate a particular style of a show, like really grab hold of that I really like this version of Cabaret. I'm gonna lift this whole kind of sense of style. But you're not taking the video and watching the video and then blocking step by step, right? I mean, I don't think that it actually takes a lot of work to do that in some ways, but that idea of kind of getting a good foundation of what your show to feel like from something that you've seen, and then that becoming something different, I think that's pretty normal. And that sounds to me more like what you're talking about, John,
Well,
right?
I will say that, like, for our department, I feel one of the things we do with our website, for example, is we have a blog, and we have our student officers write articles throughout the year. But then occasionally I'll write an article, usually about, I design the sets and different things at my school. And so this last year we did In the Heights and Hello Dolly. And so part of my In the Heights set design was talking about the original Broadway production and why it was designed the way it was, because of the way the show was written, and kind of because the show is written in that way, it demands certain things. And if you look at our set, if you squint at it, you can see the Broadway production, but it's not exactly like the Broadway production just because I don't have a Broadway stage, right? And in Hello Dolly, the reason I chose that show was because I had the students who were interested in kind of the original Gower Champion direction and the choreography and so we talked about that in the program note, and I think it's very important that directors be transparent about their influences, because we can't escape them, right? And so it's important that we use our platforms, whether it's a program note or social media or whatever, to have those discussions with our kids, to let them know that, like, I'm not a genius, like, I'm sitting over here just trying to do what's best for everyone. And
that's a great point. Yeah,
so,
because Bob Fosse is always going to be Bob Fosse, and you're going to, and we were having this discussion the other night as we kind of met about the presentation. There's only certain ways to do noises off. I mean, and noises off is the stage directions are so specific, and it only works because it's so specific. And it's going to be a 2-story set with lots of doors, and so I mean that's a little different than something that's so creative to begin with. That your version is exactly the same creation. That's where we can see that things are a little bit off. But again, if stage directions are written in such a way that they are so detailed and you follow the stage directions, I mean, when you purchase the rights to the script, you purchase the stage directions too. Although that's one of the lawsuits that was out there, was that I didn't sell my stage direction, or something. There was like about the stage directions themselves belong to the director, not to the production. And so so that was an interesting article that's in one of the resources. But what about
Travis, then as adjudicators, where do we stand?
And that's a tough one, because that's what I brought up last year, and we're still kind of in a gray area, because we're not expected to be copyright police either. We are not expected to. I don't want to research a show so heavily because I'm worried about copyright that I'm then tainted because I've watched so many professional productions to try to anticipate something. You know what I mean? I don't want to be that judge either. I normally research a show, especially a show that I don't know. And my concern about my particular experience with what happened with me recently was I was concerned that what if I had run across this videotape and watched a little bit of it and then saw a direct copy while I was judging, what would I do? And I think I brought that up at the discussion last year. And I don't think that we still have any real clear kind of expectation, except just like with rules, We're not a rule. We're not there to interpret the rules of the contest. We're there to judge the work. And so I think we have to judge the work that we see and rank it as we see fit based on what we see presented compared to the other things that are on stage. And then if we feel like there was a violation, ethics violation, that we should report that with whatever evidence we have to the UIL office. Paula was in here, but I think she stepped out. But I think that's our only avenue right now. It should not affect our decision in the moment because it's not we're never the rule interpreter. And I think that's important. How many people are judges in here? I see several, probably half, if not more. But I think that's the struggle. And I think that's why we need to have the proactive conversation about the expectation so that we don't have to put judges into that, uncomfortable position of seeing something they know is not original. But I know it's a good question, Tammy.
Like directly to Paula and not to the contest manager.
I don't think it's I don't know that it's not a contest rule violation. I think it's like, I don't, and again, that would be a clarification for Paula. But at this point, it's such a complex issue to be able to prove. You can't stop a contest while people try to go figure out if find the video and view a video.
Right.
And so I think it's something that has to be kind of processed at the state level. I'm hopeful that as these conversations are become more public, that the kinds of things that we saw recently won't happen again.
And that's what I think, you guys, I think that the more that we start having these conversations, that people realize that the conversations are happening. But, as from a personal experience, my thought is if I make it to state and another show beats me, and then I realize that it was completely plagiarized, I'm going to ask my principal to file an ethics complaint because I got beat by something that was not really that director or that school's piece of work. So I think that as things become more available and people start realizing that this is happening, that there will be ethics complaints and violations to UIL, and then they will have to address it. If I'm remembering right from the TTAO conversation last year, they very much said that we don't need to address it, that that's not our role as an adjudicator to say that to a director. So what I would encourage is that we continue to have these conversations, that we continue to educate directors that there's a right way and a wrong way to direct shows. And I would like to think that no one would do it on purpose. But I think conversation, communication, and education is the key to preventing it in the future.
Speaking of education, would one point of starting to get this out there, could we ask for an article on the legal just to bring the subject up, to try to encourage people to use recordings as resources, but have your own inspiration about your own production and not copy things? Just maybe
I think that
point.
Paula asked for us to record this session or for the activities conferences, and so originally she asked me to record it and submit it to her. We're already recording, so I'm hoping that we can just take this recording and share it with UIL for them to post, so it would be out there in all of the conferences. People still have to access that. I don't know if anybody reads the Leaguer as much as they used to when it was a hard copy that came in your mailbox and people were in trouble on the back page. Which is where people who do this would be on the back page.
Right.
They would be.
It's true.
And that was a huge deal. We don't have the back page of shame anymore. I don't know if we have to, John doesn't know what we're talking about.
It's fun.
Back in the day, there was an actual newspaper that came out, and if people were in trouble for doing things wrong, they were on the back page of the Leaguer.
And got reprimanded.
And they got reprimanded for whatever violation that they had. And a district could be reprimanded, a coach could be reprimanded, and it was the gossip. It was like the society pages or something. It was funny, but
that was the first thing you opened up to see who had gotten in trouble.
It was on the back page, yeah.
And
exactly.
John, just so you know, a newspaper, it's this piece of paper that's printed. Actually, just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm not that young. I know I look young, but I'm not that young. So I know what a newspaper is.
But the adjudication question is true, and I know that Kathy put in the chat that it would be difficult to separate your knowledge of something that's been copied, but that's what we would strive to do. I've seen shows that were direct copies of the same show from the same school, but I judged it 3 years earlier, right? And even then, you have to step back and judge it because it's new for that contest, even though they took the video and they did the exact same blocking that they did 3 years ago, And I had to judge that based on what I saw that day, and did they get advanced? And they did. But that's one of those things. Is that the best thing? Are you teaching your kids the best thing? But that was their own work, repeating their own work, right? So that's a little bit different. But it would be hard, Kathy. I agree. And if I had seen what I saw and then judged what I saw, I don't know how I would have managed it, because I think I still would have voted. I don't think it would have changed anything, because it was still such a well executed show. That's really what I would have been judging, would have been the acting and the execution of the direction. But the problem would still be there for sure.
I think the scary part is that then all of a sudden this becomes a witch hunt of.
And that's exactly what UIL is concerned about. We don't want people to be watching shows and then trying to go find what was stolen. And there's going to be things that seem similar. Like John said, there's certain things that are going to look the same in lots of shows.
Right.
I mean, the final moment in the Crucible is probably going to look very similar in lots of places. Noise is off. I mean, it's going to look like Noise is off.
Right.
When somebody had made a comment earlier in the session about, the fact that every production is going to seem a little different because you've got a different cast and a different group of kids. And so it is going to be a different interpretation. So I appreciated that earlier. I just wanted to bring that up because that was before we started talking. But I do think that's important, that what each student brings to a role is going to make a show their own. I think it's just, in my case, the 2 times that it happened, I saw the streamed version after I had judged or worked the show and had been so impressed and so blown away by the creativity. And so then seeing it, it was just so disappointing to realize that I gave all this praise for something that was not the director's creativity. They had completely copied. And so that's what was just hurtful and disappointing. I felt like I had been duped as an adjudicator.
Right. And I think that comment about the cast and crew, or the cast being different in a show, and if you're truly working with your cast in an organic way, you're going to have a different show, because there's no way, we talked about this the other night, there's no way that the show will be exactly like something that's videotaped because of the organic process, which is the way we would hope most folks are working. But if you are scripting and every single moment for your actors, turn here, put your hand there, all of that, that's when we're going to see those direct copies of things. But I agree, we don't want it to be a witch hunt, and that's what UIL is afraid of, and that's why I don't know that they would do like a leaguer article. I think they want to try to get the conversation out there and see if the fact that there's an awareness that we don't kind of see this kind of thing stopping, because we don't want to be people trying to look for reasons to disqualify somebody because they're out there. Jeannie, we didn't comment. We only have about 3 minutes left. That idea of that there's some people out there purchasing entire productions completed productions from people like.
I'm hearing this. The complete kind of a completed box set with cut script and costumes and the props and the music and that sort of thing, that there are folks that are putting their shows up for sale, is essentially what's going on out there. So I'm hearing it. So again, we were talking about it. If what I'm seeing is, particularly just recently, I'm seeing that folks are so much more likely to buy something creative from someone else. You know, it's here. Let me pay you for, you know, this curriculum, for this, for your you know, your design, for your work, for whatever it is, right? We Venmo everything everywhere right now. And so the idea that that folks are kind of boxing up their shows and putting them out there and selling them, it's a thing. So just kind of a heads up with it. And that's one of the things that we were talking about the other day about giving credit where it's due. I think that the idea as a director, if I'm going into contest, I know that it's that venue is about the kids that I've got on stage. And I don't know what kind of battles the person is fighting to get kids on stage. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, you know, they may be teaching 8 different preps, and then somebody said, you got to do a play.
Well, and again, I think if you're doing it for a fall production, you know, fall production that you buy it all packaged, then give credit. I bought, you know, this is the staging by, you know, Scott Allen and of his production of Shadowbox and then do it, but communicate that. I still think it's unethical to do it as one act play. I think that aid and directing section, ethically, you shouldn't be grabbing somebody else's stuff and sticking it up on stage and saying it's yours. Doesn't sit right with me, you know? So,
well, and under crew at the bottom, if you're going to list crew and design, I think that Scott, you had mentioned something the other day about the idea that it's kind of director in concept or direct in design, that sort of thing. I'm not sure how crediting would even work if you start,
you know, you can turn program information in, but I would really think that's where if we're getting to the point where we're restaging other people's work. I don't think that's the spirit of UIL. I don't think that's what it should be. But you know, in the fall production for sure, they're going to kick us out in just a second, guys. Johnny, that was a great idea about verbiage. You know, so maybe we can all figure out some ways to say, hey, don't do that. That's unprofessional. You know, but truly about how do you tell people, hey, you know, I just went to this great workshop about, you know, this thing and what I'm seeing really is something you might want to reconsider. But I don't know.
I don't understand why buying a production is any different from hiring somebody to design your costumes and direct your show. I mean, how is that different? That's getting professional help, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that's what I would say. It's exactly the same for UIL. I think it's exactly the same. So if someone's purchasing those items because it says you may not get aid in designing of your set or costumes, you can have a set built. You know, like if you go to the foam guy that's always at convention and say, I need this arch made, and you show him what you want and he builds it, that's okay. But someone else shouldn't design your arch for you, technically. And the same thing with costumes. So I think, Rosemary, I don't think it's any different. And it would be, in my mind, a violation. You know, black and white to me. So, but
thank you all so much. Thank you so much for doing this. It was so needed.
Well, so hopefully we'll get more conversations out there, and we appreciate you guys, you know, pulling yourself away from UIL Open Forum to come join us.
Jeannie, Scott, Travis, you guys did an excellent job with a very difficult topic. I appreciate your discussion tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
guys
so
have
much.
a
It's
good
well
night,
needed.
and we'll see you tomorrow at noon for the business meeting election.
Come back and vote for the business meeting tomorrow.
I will be there.
Is there a limit on participants?
They're going to fix all that.
All right. Thank you.
Good.
You guys have a good night.
Thanks so much.
You.
Guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Cindy. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Good job, Jeannie. Good job, Scott.
Thank you. Travis. Good job, y'all.
Thanks, Jeannie. Thanks, Mr. Springfield.
You're welcome.
See you.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.